11 years ago, work sent me to the United States. I was in the southern United States, and I spent 6 days there. So it was Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Tennessee, and then down to Jackson, Mississippi, where I'd come back. And I chose to drive, mainly because I don't really like airports. And another reason is that when you drive, you end up seeing these sort of in-between places that never make it into travel books and all that stuff. So I thought, well, tonight, it's all about society. I'm just going to give you a few of the impressions of that 6-day trip. And the first thing I noticed were the trees. And you say, yeah, trees. Well, it was just, there were trees just going on forever and ever and ever. There were just hills. You'd see this green, and every so often there'd be a sort of lighter tree within these darker trees, or the other way around. And the trees just went on and on and on. And I know you have trees in Europe, you have trees in Nigeria, where I'm from, but these trees were very different. They seemed very old, as if they had been there long before any of us had appeared there. And the road on which I was driving was only there because the trees had said, okay, you can put a road here. That's the sense I got. And talking of roads, I have to say, I know we're moving to a more, hopefully, environmentally conscious world. But if you drive on an American highway, you kind of understand why they're so reluctant to give up the car. Because these things just swoop, and it's a really fascinating experience. Another thing I noticed were flags. That you just see houses here and there along the way, and they almost always had flags. The flags were generally stars and stripes. Occasionally you'd see a Confederate flag. Sometimes you see another flag with something on it that it meant something to someone, but to me it meant nothing. I can't say I really understand flags, but I realized that, or I came to an understanding that the people who put up these flags really do mean something to those people. So it sort of made me think about that for a bit. Then there was another example, and that this is in Alabama, and because I had quite a lot of time, then I wouldn't go directly. I'd sort of meander around, and I came into this swampy area. And what struck my attention was it was as if you had light in these slices. You had these big trees, and you had these sort of stringy things that were hanging, almost as if they'd been put there by a film set, but I think they were just nature. And so I thought, I have to take a photograph of this. And so I stopped, took out the camera, was just going to take pictures of this. And when I was focusing the lens was set on infinity. So I looked through and I didn't see the vines. I saw houses, but not a nice, neat row of houses. These were really raggedy houses that you'd almost think, how is it possible that such a thing could exist in the United States? And outside of the houses were a number of people. And sort of I stopped, I'm looking at them, they're looking at me. And then this guy, he just waves, he puts his hand up, and I put my hand up. And then other people wave, and a couple of kids sort of wave like this, and I wave back. Then I get in and I go away. I don't even take the photograph. And, there are all these impressions that I get. And eventually I come to the last full day of my visit. And so I leave Memphis in the morning, and I go down south into Mississippi. And I have this one mission before getting to Jackson, is that I want to see Mississippi State Penitentiary. And it sounds crazy. It's just that, I mean, in films, in comics and everything, you see these American prisons, these gigantic walls, and somebody comes out and they look really small, and I'd never seen that with my own eyes. So I thought, oh, I need to see this. And so there's this place, it's called Parchman Farm. That's the name of the prison. And as you get there, I have to say, you have to manage expectations when you have ideas in your head, because there was no gigantic wall. There was only something that looked like a garden center. Really, that was it. I mean, I think it went further down, but that was it. It was such a disappointment, and which is a bit odd, because I have a very strong view about incarceration. I think it's very brutal, but still something anyway, I didn't see it. So I'm driving along, and there are little things I pick up. I noticed the roads. The roads seemed to be, in that area, were crumbling, and they were crumbling in a way that seemed to say, this road will never be repaired again. as if an empire is slowly falling apart. That's the sensation I got, that it could just be that people don't live there anymore. So anyway, I'm going on. At a point, I have to stop, have to take a leak. Sorry, I know it's you're not meant to do that, but I did that. Get back in the car, and driving about 2 minutes later, I see this board that tells me 2 miles up and to the right is a place called the Thinking Patch. So I think, oh yeah, I can probably get something to eat. So I drive up 2 miles, make a right, drive a quarter of a mile, I come to a T-junction. And then at the T-junction, it says Thinking Patch, left 100 yards. Turn left, arrow tells me to go right, and I find myself in a parking spot. And so I stop, get out, and look around. There's nothing. Well, I mean, there is something, but there's just nothing. There's no restaurant, there's no cafe, there's no motel. So I'm just there, and I notice this parking area for about 20, 25 cars. At one end of the parking area is a sort of stone with something written on it. And then there are these 2 steps that go down to this very big circular clearing. And in the middle of the clearing is a tree. And around the tree are 7 benches. And there's just nobody. There's nobody there at all. And so I walk down, and I get, I guess, the best seat in the house. And I sit in I sit in front of the tree and look at it. And I don't know trees. I mean, with me, I just have trees that look like this or look like that. I don't know the names of any trees. But this was a very strange tree because it had the sort of main tree part with the tree bit up there. And then it had... but wait, don't worry, I'll get there. Then it had this other bit that went like that. So it was like a right arm with also a tree bit there, And then it had this other one a bit lower down, which was like a left arm. And so I was just sitting there, and I was looking at this, looking at the bark, looking at the patterns. And then I noticed on the left arm, what would be the bicep of the left arm, there was this sort of groove that was sort of a shiny groove in the branch. And I remembered when I was a kid, a friend of mine, his dad put a swing in the garden, so he had this tree. And we'd swing on it and swing on it and swing on it until we grew too old, and he took the strings off, the rope off. And what was left were these 2 shiny grooves. And but this tree only had 1. And I thought for a moment, I looked at it, didn't think very much, and I looked up, and there was this funny wind blowing through the top of the trees. And it sounded, if you've ever listened to people talking, but you can't quite hear what they're saying, but you know it's talking, so it sounded like that, but in terms of wind. And I sat and I was just staring at this, listening to this sound. It was such a beautiful sound. It was very calming, very gentle. And my stomach began to rumble because I was hungry. So I decided, I have to go. And before I went, I thought, let me go and see what's written on this stone. So I sort of go up the stairs, get to this stone. It's really polished on one side. And at the top, you see the words, "For those who were killed and for those who did the killing, may their souls find peace and rest in the hereafter." And then underneath that, you have these sort of rows of names. And so you'd have like a date, you'd have a name, you'd have a town, and then you'd have an age. So, you see this thing repeated. And I started looking at the ages. So you'd see like 24, 31, 19. And then suddenly I began to understand the groove in the tree, what it was. When I was a kid, my dad had a lot of books in his library, and there was this book that had these pictures that fascinated me, and there were pictures of lynchings. And as a kid, I didn't have any emotional feeling. I just looked at them, and I saw sort of a guy hanging from a tree. I remember seeing a fire. There was a body in the fire, and around the fire were people laughing, having a wonderful time. And most of those pictures didn't do very much to me, but there was one where there's a guy hanging, and I really felt he was very lonely. I don't know why, what kind of thought that was, but I remember feeling that he was very lonely. And so as I'm getting these thoughts in my head, that's when I hear the sound of an approaching engine. And it's there's a way American cars, these big cars, have this funny, they don't sort of, they have this kind of sound. And I could hear this engine approaching. And I stood there, and this engine approached, and I wondered, would it go right at the T-junction, would it turn left? And it turned left, so I heard it go, and I didn't turn. I was feeling a bit spooked. And it passed, and it went along, and then it stopped. And then I heard that sort of whine sound when a vehicle goes into reverse. It sort of came back again and stopped, and then it turned, and you hear this crunch of the wheels on the gravel. And so this is when I turn, and I see this gigantic red pickup, huge pickup, and in the back are three guys, cowboy hats, sunglasses, and two of them nod, and one of them sort of does a thing to me, and I'm thinking, what does that mean? And then a guy opens the door, steps on, he's like a giant, huge, with sunglasses, a hat, and he has a gun. And the moment I saw he had a gun, my brain just short-circuited. I started seeing myself hanging. I saw myself shot. I was in, I don't know, I was just frozen. I couldn't move. I wanted to move. I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought, I'm going to die. And I thought, well, I'm not going to run because I don't want to die like a coward. I was having these kind of thoughts. And this guy steps over to me and he says, how are you all doing? And I'm thinking, what? And he says, are you okay? And I say, yeah. He said, because this monument can overwhelm people. And he tells me his name's Ray. And he says, where are you from? And I explain. I say, well, I live in Amsterdam. And he talks about Amsterdam. So we spend 5 minutes talking about Amsterdam. All the while, my madness inside me is slowly calming down. And then when he sees that I'm okay, he gets into his van or his pickup. He drives off, the guys wave, and he goes off. And I'm standing there, and I'm thinking briefly, like, I thought he was going to kill, that I didn't know him, but I'd already figured out he was going to murder me. And then before I could get further with that, my whole body began to shake and shiver. And it wasn't a normal kind of shaking. It was really, you know, where it sort of comes from your toes and you shake. And I couldn't stand up, and I just lay down on my back in the car park, and I thought, I don't care who sees me. Anybody, they can arrest me. I'm just going to lie here, and I'm going to shake. And I looked up, and you've got this blue sky, and you have these clouds moving left and right very slowly. And in that moment, those clouds were just so incredibly beautiful. And I guess that's how I have to end this story. Thank you very much. Thank you.